Welcome. We are about to start our conference, our event. My name is Laurynas Jonavičius, and my task is, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania and other organizers, to welcome all of you to Vilnius and to commence that remarkable event. So, as most of you know, Vilnius is a city distinguished not only for myriad charms, but also by its resilience in the face of economic coercion. Vilnius has weathered attacks from two of the world's foremost practitioners of economic coercion, and despite their concerted efforts, Vilnius has been able to withstand in emerging and stronger and wiser. However, and regrettably, prevailing global trends testify to the increasing prevalence of economic violence, which is having a profound impact on countries and institutions around the world. And many of those gathered here, many of you, have undoubtedly experienced that coercion and its effects firsthand. Indeed, this reality actually is the main reason which has brought all of us here together for this event. Therefore, this conference, this event aims to foster dialogue, share experiences, and forge strategies to strengthen our collective resilience against economic manipulation, economic coercion. It also aims to build and strengthen robust international networks capable of withstanding both direct and indirect economic pressures. Ultimately, the purpose of this event is to send a firm message to all perpetrators of coercion. And I will quote General George Patton here: "Pressure makes diamonds," underscoring our determination to turn adversity to strength. So, without further ado, let us begin our proceedings. And it is my privilege and honor to invite a person known for his unwavering commitment to freedom, to rule of law and human rights, even in the face of economic coercion. It is probably because of these qualities Politico has described this person as a dragon slayer back in 2022. He also happens to be a foreign minister of Lithuania. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, for his opening remarks. Minister, floor is yours.
Thank you so much for kind memory. Good morning and welcome to Vilnius. It is a pleasure for Lithuania to host this timely event on building a resilient economy and resisting economic coercion. For some of you, it might have taken many hours to reach Vilnius, and our countries might be separated by a vast physical distances. At the same time, we're all united by a clear sense that our security and prosperity should be based on a common set of rules. A widely agreed framework that offers predictability of our political and economic relations, a level playing field for both big and small, and protection from abuse with real consequences to those who decide to cheat. Rules-based international order is the cornerstone of international relations, be it on hard security or economic ties. Yet today, as Russia's war of aggression wages in Ukraine and tensions across the world are at a breaking point, this order is challenged by those who feel that size and military arsenals entitle them to be above the rules. Economic coercion that these actors use to pursue their interest is no longer a hypothetical threat, but a reality that many of our nations are forced to confront. Therefore, this conference is not just an intellectual exercise, but a much-needed step to help international community mount an effective defense of our rules-based order. For Lithuania, economic coercion is not a new phenomenon. Russia has been using it against us for decades. Just after Lithuania restored its independence on 11th of March 1990, Kremlin imposed an economic and energy blockade aimed to reverse the will of Lithuanian people to be free and independent. The blockade failed, but over the years was followed by a series of attempts to exploit our dependencies in areas ranging from agriculture to energy. In recent years, Lithuania also faced coercion from another power that aims to reshape the global order to its benefit. China tried to exert economic and political pressure on Lithuania because we allowed Taiwan to open a representation in Vilnius using its own name. I guess that coercers should have been better students of history, because attempts to influence our democracy through coercion have once again backfired. These painful experiences made our society more resilient and taught us a valuable lesson on the most effective response to coercion. Let me summarize them in 3 key points. First, be prepared. Economic coercion only works when there are dependencies to exploit. It is therefore crucial to diversify and eliminate reliance from single suppliers. There's also a lot of potential for cooperation among countries who uphold the rules-based order by creating a reliable supply chain and screening investments into strategic parts of our economies. Second, when under pressure, hold your ground and push back. The aim of coercer is to crush the victim by forcing reversal and public renunciation of its policies that deters others into submission. Standing firm against such pressure is not easy, especially when you have no tools to respond. Therefore, we need to expand our toolbox with more sophisticated mechanisms that preempt and counterattack coercive economic measures. While in serious need of reform, WTO and its dispute settlement mechanism should remain a key component in safeguarding the international rules-based trading system. On a regional level, the EU's anti-coercion instrument is a welcome achievement. Open societies should also become bolder in protecting intellectual property from theft and forceful transfers. And finally, third, to successfully resist coercion, you must have friends to support you. Coercers will aim to threaten us into silence, attempt to divide or entice us with some short-term gains. They do so because they understand that if we're united, their size advantage disappears, and it is the way more difficult to prevail. When the unity holds, the rules-based system holds, offering not just protection for one particular country, but a reliable deterrent against coercion in the future. That makes like-minded groups like this so crucial, and our discussion over the next 2 days so relevant. Together, we will explore viable strategies for resilience, not just in defense, but in proactive response to coercion. Let us be frank about our own experiences, innovative in our responses, and mindful of an ambitious task ahead, making sure that no nation would ever find itself alone and helpless in the face of economic coercion. Thank you once again for your commitment and your efforts.
Thank you, Minister, very much. Lithuania has indeed set an example and continues to uphold high standards in the fight against economic coercion, but as Minister very correctly mentioned, global challenges require global solutions, and the best practices that are being nurtured here in Vilnius need to be combined with efforts, knowledge, and tools from all over the world in order to create an effective and resilient network against economic abuse. And it is therefore an honor to give the floor to someone whose direct job is to make connections and develop strategies to counter coercion almost on a daily basis. So, ladies and gentlemen, the welcome address by Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President of the European Commission.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation and to Minister Landsbergis for organizing this timely conference. Let me first say a couple of words about the profound geopolitical changes that we are seeing over the past years. On the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic came a cascade of further crises and shocks. The tectonic plates have shifted dramatically. Intensifying competition between the US and China, conflict in the Middle East, and Russia's horrific and illegal war of aggression against sovereign state Ukraine. This means that the EU has to define and defend our own economic security interest. The impact of the war in Ukraine has ricocheted far and wide. It tests our resilience to the extreme. The course of history in the 21st century is being set in the battlefields in Ukraine. I would like to thank Lithuania and its government for its unwavering support to Ukraine. Ukrainians are also fighting for us, for the European security, for the democratic world. Only Ukraine's victory can deter Russia and other authoritarian regimes from bold moves against the collective West. The EU has responded to Russia's aggression by adopting 13 sanctions packages. We are now preparing the 14th, and we have also provided massive political, military, and financial support to Ukraine. In addition, the war triggered and accelerated several systemic reforms, not least in our energy markets. At the beginning of the war, Russia has tried to use its gas supplies for manipulation and coercion. The EU has managed to overcome its dependence on Russian fossil fuels. All this influences the way we see global economy, strategic dependencies, and partnerships. With geopolitical tensions rising, economic security is firmly on our radar, including risks of economic coercion. Coercion can target the EU or a member state, or it can result in the EU trade becoming collateral damage due to rising tensions in other places of the world. Lithuania's experience shows the importance of the EU standing firm and united against economic security risks and coercion. The importance of acting fast and firm, of standing united. This is exactly why the European Commission came out with the EU's economic security strategy in June 2023. Because we need to understand the key risks to the EU's economy and our model of open strategic autonomy, and then act in a coordinated manner both at the EU and national levels. The EU's economic security strategy aims to achieve exactly that. It does so by putting in place a framework for joint assessment and mitigation of risks. The implementation of our economic security strategy is now in full swing. We need to make sure to get the balance right. That means ensuring that the EU continues to benefit from economic openness while minimizing the risks that came from interdependencies. Together with Lithuania and other member states, we are conducting risk assessments on supply chain resilience and weaponization risks. We are looking at potential pressure points which third countries could exploit. Based on the findings of these assessments, we will define the steps we need to take to further mitigate risks both at the EU and national levels, but in a coordinated manner and by standing united. Risk mitigation is done through the balance of measures structured under three pillars: promoting the EU's competitiveness and growth, partnering for greater economic security, and protecting ourselves from risks by using protective measures such as trade defense instruments. Since December 2023, we have an anti-coercion instrument in place. We are the first jurisdiction to have such an instrument to deter any kind of economic coercion. For economic resilience and economic coercion, risk mitigation is mainly about diversification and deterrence, and building our partnerships is essential for both. It is also about deepening our understanding on the ways that economic pressure works today, and comparing our notes with like-minded and other partners. I regret not being able with you today in person, but our Chief Trade Enforcement Officer and colleagues working on our anti-coercion policy will be with you during these days to discuss these important topics. I wish you a very successful conference.
So with gratitude to Mr. Dombrovskis, I'm pleased to announce that the opening segment of our event has been a resounding success, and we can now move to the next phase. And it is called the high-level panel, and it's titled Polarization of World Trade and the Rise of Economic Coercion. So my honor to present the distinguished members of this panel. The Dragon Slayer, also known as Minister Landsbergis, please. Mr. Jose Fernandez, Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy and the Environment from the United States of America. Mr. Keiichi Ono, Senior Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from Japan. Mr. Michael Hager, representing the European Commission, ahead of the Mr. Dombrovskis cabinet. And of course, Professor Margarita Šešelgytė, Director of International Relations and Political Science from Vilnius University. And last but not least, I'm delighted to introduce the moderator of this panel, Mr. Andy Bounds, the EU correspondent for the Financial Times, who will guide us through this illuminating discussion. So, Mr. Bounds, the microphone and reins of this panel are now in your capable hands. Please.
Thanks very much, and also delighted to be here. A good excuse for my first trip to Lithuania and Vilnius. And I think the speakers before us have set the topics very well, actually, and the questions we should be asking. So first, I'm going to ask each panelist just to maybe respond to what they've heard and say a little bit about what their country or institution is doing in this field, and then we'll have a panel discussion, and there should be time for some questions from the audience as well. So I'll probably start on my left with, and we'll go down the panel. And I think as the minister has already spoken, we might hold your fire for a few till the moderating round. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be a part of such a distinguished panel. I will try to, because we have a lot of experts on the panel, I will try to look at this issue from a little bit generic perspective. How does it fit in what's happening in the world? What do we see now in the world is the changing global power balance and increased competition in multiple areas, in the area of economy, in the area of security, military security, in the area of cyber security. There are powers who are trying to challenge the order, which is based on the rule of law and democratic values. Countries such as China, Russia, North Korea, Iran are trying to attack democracies on multiple fronts and trying to also frame a sort of an alliance which is based on very clear and specific goal. Try to inflict damage on democracies and try to inflict damage on this world order. And in trying to inflict damage, they are using multiple fronts, using sharp power, using multiple instruments of weaponizing vulnerabilities, weaponizing political diversities in these countries, weaponizing economic vulnerabilities, trying to work with the psychological aspects of different societies. And we've seen this for already several years, and we are feeling that this level of competition is increasing. And the competition between China and the United States has been increasing also recently. And we have seen, probably many of you have followed the debate on the closure of TikTok. And that's an issue also widely debated in a number of European countries. How to protect ourselves against the covert but adversarial steps from authoritarian countries. And here we face the problem, because democracies are by nature open, proud, prone for the competition, prone for the good business relations. And this is our strength, but it becomes also our vulnerability. It's used by the authoritarian countries, which are closed, which are very hierarchical. And these features, these strengths, and at the same time of our vulnerabilities, have become also a very important spot that countries like China and Russia were using also in the field of economy. Lithuania, as Minister very rightly pointed out, have been experiencing this for a number of years. We know that. Russia has employed the energy blockade on us not once. Russia was banning our products. Lithuanian freedom cheese was banned in 2013, just before we were organizing EU summit, which was meant to sign the association treaties with Eastern European countries. So we were punished for spreading and promoting freedom. The same tactics were used for Ukraine. Russia has banned their chocolate. Georgia, Russia has banned their wine. So we know that, and we turn this vulnerability into our strength, trying to reduce the vulnerabilities and build up the resilience. So being an energy island in Europe in 2014, yet up until 2023, we managed to become entirely free from Russian natural gas, and Lithuania was the first country which declared that we will not have Russian natural gas when the war in Ukraine started. So we've learned this in a hard way, and therefore when China decided to exert pressure, because we decided to host Taiwanese representation in Vilnius, we were sort of already prepared. Vulnerabilities, interdependencies with China were very small, and we knew the recipes, how to deal with them. However, and that's the message to all the countries, we didn't calculate that China would start using very opaque techniques, which were not in the script, undercarpet activities to blackmail the companies of other countries. And that became scary for us. So I think that what we've learned throughout this crisis, that although you are prepared, you have to also be prepared for the crisis to escalate. Be very good in communication with your own society, with the main stakeholders, have measures for mitigation of the losses for the businesses, but also, and that is very important for small countries, and most of European countries are small countries, to build up the alliances to help you to go through this period, to have the shelter. So for Lithuania also, it was essential that we were members of the European Union, that we were members of the OECD, that we had good friends in the US, that we had good friends in Indo-Pacific. So alliances and partnerships are also very important. And last but not least, I think that this is also important to think when it comes to weaponized use of the trade and other economic activities, is that there is not unified script. And if you are prepared today, you have to bear in mind that, you know, the authoritarian powers, they're quite creative. And there is a lot of instruments in their arsenal which are not allowed for democracies, because they are not restrained neither by their political systems nor by their societies. They can do whatever. So reducing vulnerabilities, building the resilience, but also be ready for the rabbits out of the hats.
Very good advice. Thank you. So, Mr. Haga, I mean, the Executive Vice President talked about balance. We're talking about open strategic autonomy. Margarita mentioned it a bit as well. You know, how is the EU trying to find the balance between being open and being autonomous?
Oh, thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks a lot for organizing this at the very crucial moment. Not only internationally what is happening, but also European Union deciding the new way, the pathway for the next 5 years. So it's very important to have that input and to underpin what is actually necessary to drive this pathway forward. As you said, my boss has outlined already the key elements or the key parameters. Let me try to focus a bit on certain elements. I think what we have learned over the past years that, and Europe rests on openness, on effectiveness, on a flourishing trade relation with the world. We have seen that it is naive to believe that all that will happen by itself and everybody on the world plays according to the same rules or as fair as we do, or try to be as fair. So the question, and seeing this, is how to respond, how to be able to tackle these questions, how to be able to face these adversary effects while not giving up the openness, while not giving up also effectiveness. So we need to find the right balance between what actually helps us in terms of economic growth and development and what we need to do to protect ourselves, to be able to respond to coercion, to be able to respond to these threats which come from the unfair side of the world. And that is, I think, a mix of tools we need to have in mind. On the one hand, of course, we need to be prepared with our legal instruments. We need to have the tools, as it was mentioned. A toolbox which is able to respond and, even better, to deter. So not to use the tools, but to show that they are there and we are ready to implement and to use them if necessary. The second point, of course, and my boss mentioned that as promoting, we need to prepare ourselves. The single market has to be stronger. We need to have the right tools also in terms of industrial policy. It goes beyond just trade relations. We need to have the right industrial elements in the European Union. And the further element is the partnering exercise. And there I think we can do and should do much better. And it's very good that we have here on the panel the whole variety between the Pacific side and on the other side of the Atlantic. The partners we actually have, we need to work much more closely and much quicker. Yes, on the G7 level, there are certain first steps taken. We have the statements, we have the public outreach in that sense. But what it needs is a much better coordination and cooperation. And there are some also, call it frictions or cracks in the whole thing. We should avoid stepping on each other's toes. We should work together. And therefore, I mean, we had it just last Friday in Paris when Japan and the European Union agreed on a resilient supply chain initiative. Mm-hmm. How we can analyze this, how we can be much better coordinated and integrated when it comes to that anti-coercion element. There, I think, the right reference point is not a bilateral thing, neither between the US and the EU or Japan and the EU. It must be broader. We need to set it up on G7, G7 plus level. And therefore, I think we need to speed up things and we need to get into the right mode that we are interacting much closer, much quicker, much more effective. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That leads us nicely on to the Minister, Deputy Minister, if you could tell us how Japan's handling this issue.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andy, and Minister, Vice Minister, and ambassadors, and other colleagues and friends here. First, I would like to thank the government of Lithuania for hosting this important conference. I also thank Lithuania to extend its invitation to Japan, the Indo-Pacific country. A number of the Indo-Pacific economies have experienced economic coercion by various means. I'm delighted to be here to share Japan's experience and thoughts on economic coercion, economic security, and also my personal experience as a G7 Sherpa, a personal representative for Prime Minister throughout its G7 presidency year last year. Economic coercion, as previous speakers discussed, is a relatively new phenomenon. Japan has experienced it in 2010, perhaps as one of the first cases of economic coercion. At that time, a Chinese fishing vessel operating in Japanese territorial waters off the Senkaku Islands collided with a Japanese Coast Guard vessel, leading to the detention of the Chinese captain of the fishing vessel by the Japanese authority. Then, we witnessed a sharp drop in the export of rare earth materials from China to Japan, which at that time, China accounted for 80% of Japan's import source of the material. This incident was awakening to us in 2010. Lithuania, of course, experienced a case of economic coercion since November 2021, and quite a few other countries also experienced similar actions. So today's conference provides an excellent opportunity to share knowledge and lessons learned on countering and preventing economic coercion among the members of the international community. Economic coercion is an attempt to exploit economic vulnerabilities and dependencies to undermine independent decision-making of a sovereign state. In that sense, it's a national security and not in line with the international order based on the respect for sovereignty and rule of law. Japan's national security strategy, published in December 2022, made it clear by stating, quote, Japan will promote effective efforts against economic coercion by foreign countries. Furthermore, economic coercion directly targets and harms private sector entities engaged in legitimate economic activities. Economic coercion affects economic activities in ways that are not economically rational, such as diverting import sources and export destinations of target goods or services, or affecting their prices. This distorts rule-based free and fair market economy, obviously. The OECD made it clear in its research report, published at its MSCM, successfully held last week, a few days ago, under the Japan chairmanship. Furthermore, another problem is economic coercion conceals the original political intent of the coercing country and can be disguised as a legitimate measure in conformity with trade agreements or WTO systems. Such an attempt to weaponize the economic leverage of the coercing country is inadmissible, as it harms the private sector's actors engaging in free economic activity, undermines the international trading system, and constitutes a challenge to the free and open international order based on the rule of law. Here is the question. Then how to respond to the economic coercion? First, I would like to emphasize the importance of taking a whole government approach. Japan appointed a cabinet minister in charge of economic security in 2021. The Japanese Diet National Parliament passed a new act named Economic Security Promotion Act in 2022. This does not directly address the economic coercion itself, but the enacted domestic measures for economic security on the whole will strengthen the country's resilience against coercion, if any. Those measures should be taken by involving the whole government, not just some parts, some ministries, some agencies of the government. Second, I would like to emphasize the importance of collaboration among like-minded countries, as shown today. It may be difficult for a country to counter economic coercion on its own, because a coercing country may be an important economic partner of the targeted country. So this is reality. It may impose unjustified coercion because it knows that targeted economy would suffer from economic losses and then change the political decisions, like the name of the Taiwan mission in its capital, or the decision of deploying a ballistic missile defense system. So in such situations, the coerced country economy may find it difficult even to confess to a trusted partner that it has been coerced. So members of the international community need to have a framework or system to share their information in candid manner at a peaceful time and to think together how to respond to such coercion once it happens. Mindful of such recognition, Japan has taken a lead on promoting international collaboration in addressing economic coercion. One is G7. At the G7 Hiroshima summit last year, the leaders, for the first time, had an independent session focusing on economic resilience and economic security. They also agreed to launch the G7 coordination platform on economic coercion in the G7 leaders' statement on economic resilience and security, a standalone G7 statement on economic security at the leaders' level, a first of its kind. This provided the basic framework for coordinated G7 efforts against economic coercion. The platform is committed to conduct coordinated efforts in early warning, rapid information sharing once something happens, and deterring and responding to coercion. This is not just a word, as some speakers said. Since then, the experts and policy decision makers have got together in this platform many times. They think together and act together. Building on the work under the Japanese presidency, the work continues year by year under the Italian presidency this year. And also, the important point is the platform does not limit its activities only to the cases where G7 members were coerced. The statement says that the G7, quote, will also coordinate as appropriate to support targeted states, economies, and entities, unquote, and has furthermore confirmed that it will cooperate in providing assistance to third countries, non-G7 countries. So in order to oppose economic coercion and ensure any such an attempt fails, I would like to invite any country economy outside G7 to rely and count on us if it believes it has been coerced or faces such attempts. In the Pacific region, the potential for weaponization of economic dependency is evident. Japan makes efforts in various bilateral and other consultations with other Indo-Pacific region countries in raising awareness of the need to enhance economic resilience and economic security. In doing so, Japan puts importance on strengthening cooperation with their ally and like-minded partners. So together with the US, Jose, my good friend, we are committed to, quote, continue engaging partners in the Indo-Pacific region to help them identify and reduce economic vulnerabilities to support their economic development, resilience, and prosperity. This is a phrase from the joint statement published by 4 ministers in the, what we call the economic 2+2 meeting. So cabinet level, minister level meetings, foreign minister, economic minister, and state secretary and commerce secretary. Furthermore, as an example of cooperation, Japan, the United States, and the Philippines expressed concern and opposition to economic coercion and reaffirmed that they emphasize the need for close collaboration at the first trilateral summit meeting when Prime Minister Kishida visited Washington just a few weeks ago. So, Japan, together with allies and friends in this conference room today, hopes to extend the circle of partners that will not give in to economic coercion, but rather address it in a coordinated manner. Look forward to the following discussions today. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much. So now we turn to the US view. It's interesting to hear about that international cooperation, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But...
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to get back to Vilnius in the summertime. The first time we were here was in the dead of winter, and I'll tell you, it's much nicer in the spring. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to see Kay, obviously, again, and Michael. And it's been a long time since I sat next to a dragon slayer, so thank you. Look, from day one, the Biden administration has stressed the need to diversify supply chains. If you look at almost day one of the administration, executive orders were issued on diversifying supply chains on critical minerals, on medical equipment, on energy. on semiconductors. And if you then move forward, early on, we started working on what became the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest investment made in clean energy, and that's something we've done in order to diversify our energy matrix and really to promote clean energy in all sorts of ways. So you can say the same thing about semiconductors, the CHIPS Act, which is our investment to try to diversify our supply chains. And this is because one of the sad lessons that we learned during COVID was the need for us to diversify supply chains for critical materials, be it PPEs, personal protective equipment, be it vaccines, be it ingredients, and the like. This is a lesson that we learned during COVID. It's a lesson that Lithuania had learned much earlier, as you've heard, in terms of weaning away from its dependence on Russia on energy. It's a lesson that it took a little bit longer for Europe to learn. Of course, we have the experience of Nord Stream, and then of course the brutal invasion of Ukraine laid bare the dependence on Russian gas. The reluctance to move away from that dependence is understandable. It's expensive. It's expensive to try to move away from a system that prizes efficiency to one that prizes protection and the fact that you're going to have to pay more in order to have that cushion that you're going to need going forward. Beijing, China, Russia, and they use this dependence to intimidate. And in fact, it's a stated goal on the part of President Xi to use that dependence to impose pressure on countries. Our goal is to provide some breathing space. Beijing's goal is to intimidate, and in fact, I've seen, and when in speaking to countries, not only in countries that have publicly been pressured by China, but many countries simply refuse to take certain actions that they know will cause the PRC to react, and so intimidation works. It often works, and therefore our goal is to provide countries with breathing space. Early on, Lithuania gave us the opportunity to prove that there were alternatives to coercion, and this is important. You have to start with a country that's willing to stand up to a bully. That's unwilling to compromise fundamental principles, that's unwilling to compromise its principles in order to sell more soybeans. And so the first thing we have to do, and that I do all the time, and not only because the foreign minister is here, is really to express my admiration for Lithuania, in the sense that a small country was willing to stand up to a behemoth. And those were tense moments when we were here 2 years ago. As we look at how to address this situation, I think something that a number of you have already spoken about, but I think it bears emphasizing, is we have to leverage what I think is one of our competitive advantages. And one of our competitive advantages are our allies and our partners. None of us can do this alone. And one of our best allies in this effort was Japan. When early on, they bought cargo that couldn't make it into the PRC. They ended up buying some of that. Under the Japanese presidency, the G7 has launched a new platform for responding to economic coercion. The EU had its own anti-coercion instrument. It brought a WTO case that the US and others joined. And so using our competitive advantage, our allies and partners, is something that is important. The other lesson that I would take away from the Lithuanian experience, which was which gave us a chance to build the plane, as they say, as we were flying it, is time is of the essence. You know, ultimately markets will adjust, but in the short term, that adjustment can be scary. And we've seen instances of the PRC coercing countries, for example, by not providing the permit for agricultural products to make it into the country. Bananas, they will rot on the dock. So working quickly that is important. And then planning is key. It's important and to assess vulnerabilities, to look to minimize those vulnerabilities, to prepare alternatives, and to start reaching out to friends before the coercion begins, when you know that you may be a victim of coercion. We have discovered, as we speak to countries that come to us with these concerns, we have discovered that our support is most useful before coercion has materialized, because most of the time the PRC will threaten, but it will not go forward, will not carry out its threat. But you have to be prepared, and you have to minimize damages. The last thing I'll say in terms of lessons learned is that we've got to remember that oftentimes economic coercion is economic, but it's not only about economics. A lot of it is political, and as we look at countries' vulnerabilities, we've got to realize that oftentimes, certainly the PRC will target sectors that are dear to important political actors in the country. It may not be necessarily the largest industry, but it'll be strategic industries. And I think we've got to, as we look at vulnerabilities, we take that into account. The other thing that I think we knew from day one, but we stress it to any, and several countries, about a dozen countries have come to us over the last year and a half since Lithuania to say we are afraid of certain reactions, and we'd like to help. We'd like your help in thinking about what we could do. There's nothing more inherently sovereign than deciding who your friends are. It goes to the essence of a nation's sovereignty. And so when we talk to countries, we do not make recommendations. We stress that it's ultimately up to the country to decide. And as I think the director just mentioned, we've got to realize that the PRC may surprise us. So we may assess vulnerabilities, we may anticipate what they might do, but they're smart too, and they will typically throw a curveball, as we say in American baseball, and you can't always predict what they will do, and so we do not guarantee support, and even when we support, we have to understand that at least in the short term, it may not prevent damage, and this is again takes me to what I think is important. That is a country that's willing to live up to its principles and realize that at times there will be a cost. There will be a cost to those principles. 2 years ago, Lithuania took that leap of faith. It stood up to a bully. And I think it has helped us to develop a toolbox that we continue to employ. And now I'm just delighted to know that and to see that Lithuania is eager to share some of the lessons that we have all learned. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So on that note, Mr. Landsbergis, you talked about the need for more international cooperation and the need for new sophisticated mechanisms. We've heard a little bit about the international cooperation that's happening at G7. Do you think that needs to go further? And what sort of mechanisms, would you like to see?
Well, I would begin, from the very beginning. Why we're here in Vilnius. So, couple of reasons. One is definitely that Lithuania was one of the last countries to face economic coercion. But as we do say, unfortunately, may not be the last. And therefore, the experience and the example is useful. And there is a difference that I believe, between our case with China, our cases with Russia that we had previously and that were mentioned during the interventions here, that we managed to find a path to today. And then a couple of examples were mentioned already, but I think that one of them is very, very important, is the level of transparency that the government of Lithuania decided to offer. And there are a couple of layers to that transparency. First of all, the transparency to your business. And this is what we tried to establish in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when the coercion started, and even before that, really trying to go case by case as to what is needed. And it went as far as really trying to figure out where the shipment that is stuck in the middle of Indian Ocean, a ship full of peat coming from Lithuania and bound to one of the ports in China. The ship owners were basically informed that they cannot disembark in China. And this is where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually micromanaged the ship, from the middle of the ocean to Malaysia, in some cases to Taiwan, in some cases to Japan, so that the shipments would not need to return. And we've been working more than half a year with every company that experienced issues while trading with China. We try to explain what we're doing, what our partners are doing, what we're able to do, what we're not able to do, because in some cases the requests went beyond our capacity to help. But it reduced tensions at home. It offered a possibility for frank conversation as to what is happening and what needs to happen, and actually helped us to navigate out of the situation. The second level of transparency is speaking out to your friends and really explaining where you are, explaining that the political decision-making process that is happening in the country, and really being extremely clear as to what is required from the international community. This was new to us as well, because with Russian coercion cases that happened in 2014, as Margarita mentioned, and then even before that, I don't think we've reached out that far. In many cases, you believe that this is your problem, you have to deal it at home, and you might mention in council, in Brussels, here and there, but basically this is where it stops. In our case, we reached out to Brussels, we reached out to Washington, and we reached out to Indo-Pacific. And even we've built on the partnerships that we even did not know that we had. And started to strengthen them, started to reinforce them, and then you start getting a positive feedback. And lastly, the transparency of informing the coercer, that they would know that you're not about to be silent, and you cannot be silenced. And this is from our experience, probably is one of the strongest deterrents. Because the belief is that under pressure, the countries would not speak out. The companies would not speak out. And in the silence, this is where the coercive is the most effective. Because either you're afraid of internal political debate, either you're afraid that the international cooperation and assistance will just not be there, and this is what keeps you silent. But this is where it works for the coercer. So we've been very clear, also to the PRC, that we are going to speak out loud, because this is in many cases, this is the instrument that we do have, because you cannot even compare the sizes and the ability of economies to withstand certain pressures. And I think that this is, if I were ever to be asked, what worked, I would say that transparency.
Okay.
And this is the main instrument that I would suggest others to really look into and possibly use if their situations permit. You were asking about the international instruments. For us, the international instruments, apart from the political environment that was created during the coercive period, I would say what obviously is the only trade regulatory environment that we do have, which is World Trade Organization. And even with the start of the panel that was started by European Commission on our behalf, is already a push and a deterrent. And I think that, I've mentioned that during my initial intervention, if we're able to strengthen this, because it does work, it can provide results, even though many of us are losing faith because of a very long time frames for the results to be reached and, very difficult procedures and whatnot, but it does work. And it's the only mechanism that we do have currently, and therefore it is needed, especially for those who are under pressure.
Mikhail, is that WTO case still going on, or what's the current status? Yeah. And also, what's the EU view of working? I mean, you obviously got to coordinate 27 together first, and then go to the G7 with it. Well, they have their own voices as well. So I mean, it's probably a bit harder, as if the EU on that sort of cooperating. You have to cooperate within the EU and then go to the world with solutions.
Well, it has disadvantages, but it has also advantages. Yeah? I mean, if you're part of a club, you're stronger. And that's exactly what happens in a union of 27. You're not alone. You're not standing alone. You're helped, you're supported, you're supported by others. And I think the Lithuanian case came a bit early, in a sense, because we were working on this anti-coercion instrument, so we couldn't use it at that moment in time. So it came a bit early in the sense that we had to respond then with a WTO case, and knowing that, of course, the WTO is focusing on trade elements, trade distortions, infringements in the trade sector. It does not capture fully that coercive nature, what certain countries are doing. But still, as the foreign minister said, it's a strong signal. It shows that we are determined to fight for this. And I think it's also one of the elements and one of the tools we have to use. Now, for the future, of course, the anti-coercion instruments provides an even better, more solidarity-driven tool which the Union has developed. We have not used it yet, but it's a deterrent, and it shows that we are committed to use the full force and the different layers provided in that anti-coercion instrument to show that this club really can fight back. Now, the interesting thing, and one of the elements I raised in my introductory statement, I think it requires as well to look at, and it's a showcase actually for a PhD thesis, what happened in terms of diversification. So actually, Lithuania had a benefit out of this. So the trade relations which were focusing on China in certain sectors now are diversified, now with certain Indo-Pacific countries. So actually this approach of diversify helps our economy, helps our trade relations. So also from that angle to be seen, of course, interesting to develop that strategy further and that diversification, but that requires one of the elements, we also have to be honest about it, that the European Union is ready to engage, and diversification means also ready to negotiate free trade agreements. Not only to negotiate, to finalize them. Not only to finalize them, to ratify them. And there I think we need a much stronger push, which helps us also in the sense of fighting back coercion.
On the international, is there further you would like to go, Keiichi, on the international stage? You've got the G7 platform, but do you think it could be developed further?
Thank you very much. before getting into that, first, the Lithuanian case was also another awakening to us because Lithuania is an EU member state, and perhaps trade dependency on China was relatively smaller than the Indo-Pacific countries. And in the past, the alleged economic coercion cases were not all, but many cases occurred in the Indo-Pacific countries like Japan, Australia, and some others. So we realized that this would also happen. This could happen in Europe as well, unfortunately. And also, we are very impressed by the EU's unified and coordinated response to the Lithuanian case by responding to a specific case in Lithuania, and also to the moving to the direction of enacting the European Union anti-coercion instrument. So this is a very important event. And also transparency, as Minister stressed, is also a very important. This is one of the lessons from the Lithuanian case, I believe. As I said in the first remarks, some of or many of targeted economies may not like to disclose everything to the world because of its relations with coercing big countries, giants. And that is, in a sense, taken for granted. But we need to share the information at a peaceful time before something occurs. And once it happens, then it's very important to the early warning systems and think together how to respond to that. So, well, that's what we've learned from the various past cases. Then G7 platform, yes, we established it a year ago. And since then, we've been working a lot, very intensively among the experts of the G7s. We share the experiences, and I actually asked my colleagues to make a sort of a habit of sharing the information once an alleged case occurs. A good example is gallium, germanium, and graphite. This is an export control measure by China. So we don't know whether it's economic coercion, but at least that affects the Japan and some other countries' trade relations with China on those critical minerals. Then it's important for us to share the information on those trade development situations and also the measures by China in this case. So the sharing of the information, and if it becomes more serious, then think together on how to respond if necessary. This is a very important measure. And the last but not least, as I said again, this is a G7 coordinated platform at this stage, but the G7 is very happy to work together with non-G7 countries and many countries in the Indo-Pacific regions and others. So if once some alleged economic coercion occurs in outside G7, then we are very happy to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Margarita, apart from finding someone to do a PhD thesis at your institution on the Lithuanian case, what do you think on the international? Do you think it's going in the right direction? There's ways it could be improved?
It's a very difficult question that you're asking, because I think that some of the countries, and in particular in Europe, countries are still learning the new things and unlearning the old ways of thinking. Because for a long time, there was a belief that interdependence in economy is not a bad thing. And in fact, in the globalized world, it's very profitable. So there were different understandings, different logics, how economy realm and security realm were ruled. In economy realm, the openness, interdependences, and getting global was an advantageous thing. In the security environment, in the security realm, it's more about the protectionism, closing the borders, looking inwards. And now what we are facing, I guess, that these two things are merging because authoritarian countries are merging those things. For them, there's no difference. Is it a military instrument or economy instrument? And if they have a particular goal to punish you or go for something, they put all the possible instruments in one basket and they will use it. For us, it's a bit new. And we have to rethink our institutions, our norms, in terms of how these merged realms affect us. For instance, anti-coercion instrument is basically ruled by the security logic as a deterrent, but it's operating also on the economy realm, and the economy realm is about the competition, how to strike the right balance, not to be overprotective and be still efficient and competitive, but also ensure that security is provided for the European countries. And this goes not only in this particular realm, it goes it works in other realms. For instance, now European Union is trying to ramp up their defense industries. Again, the defense issues are guided by the logic of defense. But what they have to do is that they have to bring in more economic logics in this particular realm, so that the countries would be more open, trying to cooperate with each other, trying to procure together. So this thinking is also changing, and are we getting, we are not there, obviously, but are we getting closer? Here's to be seen in a couple of years. Another important aspect when it comes to Europe is also the decision-making procedures. And who is responsible for what? So in terms of when you talk about the security and defense, it's definitely Council and the member states. When it comes to the trade, it's European Commission, how the decisions are taken. So now anti-coercion instrument is advantageous in that sense that a lot of powers have given to the Commission, and the decisions will be taken based on qualitative majority voting. So you can avoid the veto situations that European Union was facing with the sanctions and other potential responsive measures in fight against authoritarian countries. But you know, do we know how this method works? It's still a double majority. It's about the influence of the big powers. Are they on board? I think that the problem that European Union does not have a very unified policy vis-à-vis China will also be put on the table, because France and Germany obviously have a different position than Lithuania. And it's normal, because my colleagues were speaking about openness, transparency, and also willingness to bear the cost. But it's also about what is at stake. For Lithuania, we had a very complicated history. And for us, adversarial steps from China, Russia, brings a lot of problem to our security and survivability, but not in the cases of other countries where interdependencies are still huge in particular sectors. So they have to learn how de-risk particular sectors, which sectors are strategic sectors, and try to protect these sectors. So it's another avenue for learning. And last but not least, the narratives. I think that we also have to learn the power of narratives, and authoritarian countries are using these narratives in the global space and trying to win hearts of minds in the global south, for instance, but also within our society. So what is very important and what European Union as such and European countries have to learn, and not only European countries, but the wider alliance fighting against the authoritarian countries, that we have to be very firm on indicating what is the lie. And when the coercer says, I'm not doing anything, that's not me, that's something happening, and maybe that the victim is guilty itself, I think that it's very important to stand firm and be together in this narrative, trying to change this narrative, not allowing this narrative to float around, to poison the minds of our societies, but also to poison the minds of potentially like-minded countries beyond our democratic alliances.
I think that's an excellent point. I'm going to go to Jose in a minute, but just on the original Lithuanian, on this case of different member states having different views, Gabrielis, when you first told your colleagues in the Foreign Affairs Council, I'm in trouble with China because I recognize, I called something Taiwan, which should be called Taipei under Chinese, under strict EU policy. I'm guessing the reaction wasn't, let's go for it, guys, let's take them on. I mean, it took some time, right, to talk people around?
Well, I think it was the meeting that where we had this discussion was a Gimnich meeting in France, and then informal Foreign Affairs Council. And I've asked for the AOB, any other business point, and I said, look, we're in a crisis situation. Really, I mean that's the way we see it here in Lithuania. I mean, the pressure is enormous, and we need solidarity. I think that the first reaction that I've got from High Rep was, look, you cannot call this a crisis. But then I think that the decisions were made from a strategic standpoint. That there was a very quick realization that this is not about the crisis for European Union. This is not about to affect, a trade balance with China or something like that. But this is an example, one path, and vice versa. If it is sold correctly, if there is solidarity, and it would lead a very, very different direction. And actually, at that point, it was a French presidency, and very much depended on the French decisions. Even though, as Margita says, in some cases it feels like there is a quite wide difference when it comes to approaches, to how how to approach a trade partner like China, when it comes to Lithuanian standpoint and Paris. But the French presidency had seen then the possibility of strategic outcome, whatever decision is made, when one is made to support Lithuania, and the strategic outcome, if not to support it. So I can tell you, answering the question with a long remark, is that on the contrary to one's belief, the decision was quite quick and quite rapid.
Okay, thank you. So Jose, awkward question for you. Again, the US can often be seen to be acting sometimes unilaterally. I mean, you talk about people coming to you, but we've seen with chip sanctions and these kind of issues that member states can feel slightly pressured, or the US has its domestic agenda as well in terms of its own industry and so on. So how do you ensure that this isn't seen as the US using its economic weight in the world to sort of get people to do things, and sort of generally in the international interest?
Well, so I would argue, first of all, this is, as I said earlier, it's a sovereign decision, and we, under no way would we ever presume to make that decision for countries. I don't think there's a more inherently sovereign decision. So we're very deferential to countries, and I think it is different from the CHIPS Act and the IRA. I mean, when you look at what we've done in the semiconductor space with the CHIPS Act, we've probably dispersed about half of of the 52 billion. And the great portion of that, the majority of that, has gone to foreign companies, Samsung, Korean companies, Japanese companies, Taiwanese companies, TSMC and others. And so that is not protectionism. It is something that we, in fact, what we're trying to do is to bring foreign companies more into the U.S. And look, in an ideal world, this wouldn't be necessary, right? Globalization tends to value efficiency. This is not, in an ideal world, the most efficient way of running your economy. But unfortunately, given some of the malign actors that we have to protect ourselves. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, and in terms of diversification, how far has the US gone? I guess you have more resources possibly than the EU, certainly in energy and critical minerals. So you're domestically exploiting what you have. What about in terms of, finding from elsewhere in the world, which the EU has sometimes found difficult?
Actually, on critical minerals, we do not. We're very vulnerable. And critical minerals, and we've worked, all of us together on this. We're going to need 42 times the amount of lithium by 2050 that we use today, if we're going to meet our goals. 25 times manganese, 25 times cobalt. And something like graphite that Kay mentioned, 100% of the graphite is either mined or processed, and anyway, it's controlled by the PRC. That's a vulnerability that dwarfs anything that we saw in COVID. And so we've got to address it, and we've put together, and these gentlemen know it, the Mineral Security Partnership, to do that together, because in many ways we can, and none of us can do it alone. Even with $369 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we are working together to identify projects, to finance projects, and to do it in a way that upholds high environmental, social, and governance standards, because ultimately that's our competitive advantage. We will work with communities. So this is yet another example where friendships and common values translate into common approaches that we all need in order to engage in this new reality, which says that there are factors beyond efficiency that we need to take into account.
And Keiichi, how is Japan getting on with diversification?
Yeah, thank you. Not just economic coercion, but under the economic security, there are many issues to establish the resilient supply chain and critical technology, critical infrastructure, and critical minerals, as Jose discussed, economic coercion, non-market policies and practices, and level playing field in the trade areas, and others. All those are interrelated. And that would form the kind of the basis for responding to possible economic coercion. So they're all interrelated. So all the measures are very critical and important for us. And diversification is one of those important topics, I believe. Particularly critical minerals or other some critical technology supplies. As I mentioned in the first remarks, our experience in the rare earth materials in 2010 is actually, that was a good case for us and a good lesson for us. At that time, our dependency on China was 80% on rare earths. But after that, we tried to diversify our sources of supply on rare earth materials. Then it became down to about 60%. So this is one example. But such economic coercion activities awakened us, and we made efforts in diversification. On critical minerals, as Jose mentioned, we've been working together with the US, with the European Union, and other partners to diversify our supply chains. Of course, not just from the Japan's viewpoint. We need to take the views or understand the views of the supplying countries, like CDR, and Senegal, and other African nations, not just Africa, of course, but Latin American countries and others. And those producing countries, they would like to have maintain the local value. For the G7 nations, now important topic is the creation of local value supply chains. So as Jose mentioned, at this stage, on some critical minerals or other products and services, the processing and assembling process is occupied or depending on one country. We try to diversify that supply chain as well. So not just for Japan, but for the international countries or like-minded countries, we need to tackle this together by various ways of cooperation. Thank you.
And how is the EU's diversification push going, Mikhail?
No, as I said before, I think what I think is important in addition to all what has been said, creating win-win situations. We need to have the better offer. We need to have the more attractive offer. That's the only way how we can make sure that others are aligning with us or helping each other or getting out of that impasse. So a strategy of diversification has to reflect as well the other side of the table, has to reflect whatever the expectations, has to reflect as well their economic development. And we see this in various countries, Africa, but also in Southeast Asia. Take Indonesia as an example, rich in terms of raw materials, but of course also interested in economic development. So that better offer, and with Global Gateway, the European Union has an instrument in that, helping these countries to develop, makes us also attractive as a partner. And there, I think much more can be done in aligning or cooperating on international level in terms of G7. How to bring that all together. The MSP is one example. It's not only about the projects, it's also about this policy development, how to make all these corporations more attractive. And I think there we need to reflect on how we can do better. Yeah? With the MSP, we launched this new pillar just a few weeks ago. So I think there more thinking has to go in, more reflection on, as I said, what the other side of the table actually needs and how we can interact amongst us better to target the various areas of the world. Take Latin America, take Africa, take Southeast Asia. So there more alignment is needed. When it comes to diversification, and I said this before, I mean, I think Europe has to understand we need this. And I think that has not trickled through the whole chain of the member states or the societies in Europe. There's too much resistance still that international cooperation, trade relations are actually beneficial. And also beneficial to finance ideas like Green Deal, the transition into a low carbon or zero carbon economy. So that understanding in the European Union that without this diversification, requiring trade relations, requiring free trade agreements, we will not achieve what we want, that is still, let's say, on the slow burner, unfortunately.
Yeah. But the question of balance is so important. Just a quick follow-up on Indonesia. They want to restrict their nickel supplies because they want to process more domestically, and the EU has taken them to the WTO because they want to do that, right? So isn't there a tension between that and saying to them, we would like to help you, sell your nickel to us by processing it in the country? And they say, we'd like to process it in the country. And you say, well, no, we want it raw so that, because that's trade, you're infringing trade. There's an export control, a bit like, China is doing on graphite.
It's a question on the measure. And I think there we are negotiating with Indonesia a free trade agreement. That's exactly the point in time where you look at the other side of the table and what they want. Of course, an export restriction is not the right way, but there can be incentives, and I mentioned Global Gateway as one element. There are some recipes also to make sure that this win-win situation is actually happening. And I think the European Union is not interested in only getting the raw materials simply like that. No, there is an interaction and also helping these countries to develop because it benefits both sides. if they develop, they are an interesting market also for our products. So understanding that, I mean, it's not a one-way street in terms of we want raw materials and nickel from Indonesia. No, it's a two-way street, and creating that win-win situation, I think, is of utmost importance. We can do that.
Okay, we'll move on to the costs of fighting economic coercion. A couple of people on the panel have said it's expensive, you have to reorientate you don't go for the most efficient system. So who should pay those costs? How do companies fit in? And how does the public get told, you might be paying more for things? Maybe we'll start with you, as you've done it in Lithuania.
Well, as it was mentioned, our case was different in the sense that we have limited exposure to Chinese market. But we have been witnessing an increased interest by China, not just in Lithuania, but also in all Central and Eastern Europe, to trade, to invest. And as Margarita rightfully mentioned, for us it is always, as a big authoritarian country coming in, always has this political connotation. And therefore, certain measures have been made have been taken long before the coercion even started. So we have laws forbidding or at least limiting the investment into sensitive sectors in our country by countries such as Russia or China. That means that our ports, airports, railways, customs are quite protected from Chinese investment. Same goes for commodities such as electricity, generation, or grid, and so on and so forth. So that limits the competition, that raises the price, obviously. What we have been doing is trying a couple of things. First of all, to try and invite the countries that we consider our closest allies to participate in tenders that are organized by the state. So that we would not be left with a single supplier, which is way more expensive than a supplier from China would be. So this is important. The second thing is that we have a constant discussion in Lithuania about our national security. It never stops. It flares up definitely in times like 2014 when the first attack against Ukraine happened. Now it's very much ongoing. So much of our conversation about economic coercion, independence, our strategic alliances, transatlantic alliance, and the importance of it comes and is seen through the lens of national security. And this is how you communicate with your people. There is a margin with every transaction. There is a margin of security, and you have to calculate that in, and you have to be fair about this. And now it's very clearly seen. If you see, and if you are out there listening into the debates in the whole eastern flank, you would hear very similar notes like this. This is a bit less heard, the further south you go to European South, where different discussions are going on. But still, it's shifting all over Europe. But here, it's very much national security based.
Jose.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on something the foreign minister just mentioned, and it's something that's dawned on certainly on me in the last, since the invasion, is the role of history in this whole thing. You can't look at you go to Kyiv, and one of the things I always say that I took away is they have no plan B. They, they lived through Stalin's Great Famine. They lived through a lot of the horrors, and of course you have the history here. It's a different, equation, and history is immediate here in a way that it's not in other parts of the world. So that's, I think that's something we take into account constantly.
And in terms of convincing people with maybe a different history, like the US, which I guess has fought in wars but never been, conquered, how do you tell your citizens, we might need to pay more for things because we don't want them from
we're
China?
seeing it now. I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act is a way to incentivize investments that might not otherwise come to the U.S. Same thing for the CHIPS Act, and I think the other way we're seeing it now is, the China is reacting. There is a predatory pricing going on in terms of we're investing in lithium mines, and lithium prices are down 85% in the last year. Why is that? Well, it's somebody saying to you, if you're going to spend money, you're really going to spend money. We're going to make you spend money. Solar panels. I was in a Korean plant in the U.S., and they tell me that per watt their costs are 10 cents higher than the PRC, and they weren't before. So this is it's a constant. People, as they say, the other team gets the ball too, and they are reacting as well. And so I think, we may have to pay more, and that goes back to what I said earlier. It's not about efficiency, only about efficiency. It's also about guarding against the risk.
Anybody else want to come in on that point?
May I? On the cost for the private businesses, there are two separate categories or topics, I think. One is more general sense, how to get understanding of establishing the resilient supply chain from the business's viewpoint. Second is a more specific case that a specific economic coercion activity was initiated by a coercing country, and some private businesses were hit by it. In the first case, more general, at a peaceful time, in a sense, before specific coercion starts, the most important thing is to have dialogue with the private business and to get the understanding from the private business. Because I myself often face the questions from them that economic security measures versus free trade, traditional free trade things. But of course, gradually in the, several years have passed since this kind of discussion started. Private businesses now generally understand that they need to take some measures from the economic security perspectives, because they fully understand that to establish a resilient, diversified supply chain is interest for them, benefit for them. So not against the free trade and other things. So that kind of dialogue and to get understanding generally is the most important thing. And in addition to that, in our case, Japan, in accordance with the legislation, Economic Security Promotion Act, of course, in some cases, the government may provide assistance to the private businesses for creating resilient supply chains, such as the chips and some others. That's general. And the second category is a more specific case. When a private company is hit by a specific measure of economic coercion by certain countries. In this case, it's maybe more difficult because something already starts, and how to help this private business, or say, not necessarily in Japan, but say in the friendly countries in the Indo-Pacific, for example, or Europe, how to help this company, private business. It's more challenging, I believe. But sometimes this may not be a governmental measures, but as a friendly gesture, sometimes people may buy the products of that targeted countries, say banana, for example, that from the that targeted economy for the friendly gesture. That is a help to the private business and also economy on the whole. And we have just recently opened the kind of the contact point of each overseas mission as a contact point with the private business on economic coercion. So economic coercion contact point sort of things. This is the purpose is to let the private business come to us, the embassies or overseas missions, to tell if any problem happens or starts. Because as we already discussed, sometimes they don't like to disclose this to the public because they may be retaliated. That's why we are now announcing that we set up a contact point. This is a window for you. And if you have any problem or maybe hint of problem, then come to us. And this may not be disclosed to the public, but we are very happy to talk to you. So we are now offering this kind of measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Margarita?
Yeah, well, again, to bring in more generic picture, who has to pay? I think that we have to look a bit broader, because the costs of many things will be increasing. And here we face the dilemma: free and secure product. How much we're ready to pay for free and secure product in defense, because we'll have to pay more for defense in this global competition. In economy, the product that we want to get, and the situations that we do not want to be bullied by someone, some authoritarian country. Safe internet, Green Deal, climate change. So the costs will be rising in a number of areas. And I don't think that we will be able to avoid the larger debate in the societies, sort of a necessity of a new social contract. That, okay, we need more money, where we are getting it. Because it's already starting. It's already starting in particular in the area of defense in Europe. From 1%, we jumped to 2%, now we're thinking about 3%, or maybe even 4%, where to get money. So new creative ways. Because we need also money for social security, for the medical services, education, also important. So there will be a need to renegotiate, and I think it's the communication has to be on the table already. If you want to enjoy your European way of life or Western way of life, if you want to enjoy freedom, if you want to be secure on the internet, you have to pay. Otherwise, as there was this famous movie, Social Dilemma, if the product is for free, then you are the product. So you have to understand this. But my challenge is that I am afraid that, we are facing too many challenges for society to cope, and therefore we are having rising populist and radical movements all over the democratic countries. And we have to be very careful, because this is a very fertile ground for authoritarians, again, to inflict damage on us. So a lot of challenges. I don't have a silver bullet, but what I'm trying to tell that there will be a need at some point to renegotiate how we live. But what I want to bring up to the table, I think that it was under-discussed, because we're talking about interdependency. So we are dependent on China for raw materials, for many other products, but China is also dependent on us in many, many instances. So can we use this dependency also ensure that China is deterred? China is afraid to attack us. So I think that there is an important thing to swap the thinking and swap the just general narrative. It's not only us who have to be afraid, but also let's make authoritarians to be afraid. Find the vulnerabilities, what are their vulnerabilities? And the regime stability is their vulnerability. And this is also our strength, because we are open and we're democratic, and then they are closed, and then they're afraid.
I mean, Mikhail, obviously the EU has taken a number of measures using new instruments, which often involve China. I mean, is that part of any particular strategy, or is it just, timing that these new things are out there? So, we have the foreign subsidy instrument, we have the, obviously classic trade defense as well, and many others.
No, I think the basic question is, if you have international trade relations, you play by the rules. If you don't play by the rules, then you have to face the tools we have. And that's exactly the point. I think that interdependence or the mutual dependence actually, yes, is an argument. But on the other side, we also see that in particular authoritarian regimes are willing to pay a higher price than we are. So it's more easy, or it's easier for authoritarian regimes to push through even own damaging policies than it would be for us. But when we come to the question how to react and how to respond, I think we have broadened over the last years the toolbox to address what I would call foul play on the international level. If someone is not playing by the WTO rulebook, yes, WTO cases is one, but as we have seen, not very quick and not very efficient in responding, and dispute settlement also an open question there. We have a toolbox which trade defense instrument, anti-coercion instrument, international procurement instrument, you name it, where we are possible to respond to various instances. And that is country agnostic. It's not only China, let's be honest. So with this, we are equipped. And I think and I said this before, we need to cooperate and coordinate much closer with our allies. And G7 as one element, but that's why I call it G7 plus. From the outset, we have to think in a broader context of the like-minded countries.
Anyone else want to come in on that point about vulnerability of other regimes, or should we go to questions from the audience? Yeah? Okay. So we've got about 15, 16 minutes left. Time for some questions, hopefully. There's a microphone at the back if you want to put your hand up, if you want to ask a question. Don't be shy. Somebody out there. Here we are, the lady here on the end there. Yeah, thank you. And if you would just introduce yourself so we know who you are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Abigail Vasselier, I work at MERIC's, the Mercator Institute on China Studies. I have a question to the Undersecretary Fernandez, and it's about the WTO. I think we heard the Foreign Minister Landsbergis making a call, and while acknowledging that we may have different vision of what the rules-based order is going to be, and especially about the WTO, it still had a deterrent effect. Can we count on the United States to be working with us in that framework now?
The easy answer is yes. The question is how do we work? Therein lies the question, but yes.
Okay. So does that mean a functioning dispute settlement system if we're going to get into into this? Okay. So we'll see what emerges from that. Thank you very much. Any more questions out there? Otherwise, I'll have to ask some more. Okay, thank you. There's a chap at the back with the glasses. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm from Jungang, South Korean newspaper, and I'm very happy to be here, especially Sir Minister. We've had the amazing interview a week back in Seoul. I'm very happy to be here in Vilnius. I have a question regarding this whole economy coercion. My country, South Korea, is suffering coercion not only from Beijing, but also from Moscow, Russia. And in line with that, a lot of people inside my country is calling for maybe it would be very helpful if we could join G7 plus, which was just mentioned. It could be G8, could be G9, but it would really help South Korea if we could G7 on a regular basis. And I would like to ask both of you, Vice Minister, as well as Undersecretary, how you take South Korea joining the G7. Thank you.
I'll go first.
As a former Sherpa.
I always defer to my Japanese colleague, but not this time.
You can promise everything.
Look, I will tell you this. Obviously, Italy is the head, is a chair of the G7 this year. Japan was last year, and they invited, I believe, Korea to the G7. You'd have to engage them. I will tell you that from our viewpoint, South Korea has been a wonderful partner on trade, on technology, on coercion as well. So I can't speak for the G7, but I will tell you our relations are quite strong. We just have finished a couple of months ago one of our economic dialogues, and I can tell you that the alignment is very much welcome.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for a question. I'm at this stage, I cannot answer directly to the question that whether South Korea will be joining the G7 as G8 or whatever it is. But what I can stress is that RK is a very important partner for Japan and for G7. That's why, as Jose said, last year, the Prime Minister Kishida invited President Yoon to Hiroshima as an important partner. And also, we have extended our cooperation with ROK and other important like-minded countries on many issues. And this economic security could be a good example, good area that we can work together. As Mika said, this is not the issue for just G7, obviously. G7 plus is very important. Just last year, OECD agreed on the concern, serious concern over the economic coercion, and also they agreed that they would ensure that such attempts would fail. So RK, South Korea is a very important partner in this context, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Justinas Mickus. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Lithuanian Government Strategic Analysis Center, I think, Strata. For the sake of completion, because the panel, I think, focused primarily on economic coercion, I wanted to ask about the first 4 words of the panel discussion, which is about the polarization of the world trade. Because it seems, at least from the high-level statistics, that it would be a hard claim to say that polarization is happening. We know that the bilateral trade relations in goods, for example, between the EU and China, between the US and China, are steady. We also see that to the extent that there are shifts in world trade relations, they're not polarizing. There is diversification into certain regions. We have hinge countries that are gaining importance, etc. And it seems that has a couple of important consequences. We have the rise of certain economies that gain much more power both to China and to the US, say Mexico, as these interlocutors. We have the ongoing problem, easy to politicize, about deficits with China, which can then probably generate or contribute to the already existing skepticism about trade, which then impinges on market access, diversification dilemmas, etc., etc. And looking forward ahead, if some not so good things happen this fall, I don't think we also will have polarization if, say, a 10% tariff is imposed on US allies should November go a certain way. There will also not be polarization, but it will make this governance, a politically informed governance of this regionalized, somewhat fragmented, somewhat more Frank Gehry-like postmodern global trade system much more difficult. So I wanted to hear a couple of thoughts about the world trade aspect of the discussion, because we heard, I think, really great insights on economic coercion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think the WTO says that trade within these 2 broad blocks is growing faster. So if you look at people that vote with each other at the UN, the trade between them on China, on Russia, the trade between them is growing faster than the trade with, non-members of those blocks. So there's not polarization, but they're worried about a fragmentation, that we start dividing into allies and autocrats, right? So I guess that's the sort of question: are we heading down that route, or is this actually just the sort of cream on the top, in a sense, the economic, certain raw materials, certain technologies? We're not talking about wheat and, you know, stuff that makes up the vast amount of world trade, or plastic toys, or, you know, whatever it might be that we get from China. Anybody want to try that?
Okay.
Okay.
Just
Come
a
on,
quick
Kichi.
comment.
Yeah.
Well, first we need to know the fact, reality, that our trade with China, for example, has not decreased at all. I understand that the U.S.-China trade volume was a record high last year or just 2 years ago. And for Japan, China is the largest trading partner. So that is a reality. So I'm not necessarily happy with the polarization of the world trade.
Well, I just redefined it as maybe slight splitting.
I'm not challenging the host,
Okay.
the
Division.
foreign minister, but that's some reservation about it. But of course, at the same time, in reality, as we discussed a lot already today, we are facing a kind of a new challenge, weaponization of the economic tools for the national security purpose by certain economies. So we need to respond appropriately to this new challenge. That's why we've been discussing this. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the polarization of the trade, I believe. We are very happy to continue the Japanese investment to China or trade relations with China. So that's not the polarization, I think. Thank you.
Okay.
Just to pick up on what Kay mentioned, look, we keep saying that there is a distinction between decoupling and de-risking. We do not seek to decouple. We do seek to de-risk, and by that we mean there are certain strategic industries where we are concerned, and that arises from the fact that the lines between state champions and the state are blurry at best, and that you have a military-civil fusion and certain legislation in China that really makes so quote unquote private companies instruments of state policy, and that I think embodies the crux of the problem. We are concerned, you know, whereas our general trade with China continues to increase, we are concerned on the polarization point that there is, we see more and more dual-use items being sold by China into Russia, and that are being used to support Russian war effort, and that's a concern. But I don't think you should extrapolate from that we intend to decouple. No, I think the general trade continues to increase.
Anybody else want to go? Yeah.
Maybe just to add another dimension to this, and I fully agree. It's always eye-opening if you go into a G7 meeting of trade ministers and a G20 meeting of trade ministers. And I think that understanding of what is happening, the international dynamics, the more assertive stance of, in particular, some of the G20 members tells a story. And we have to reflect on this. And staying in the club of the G7 is one element, but how to do the right outreach and how to create what I called before that win-win situation to attract also some others of the G20. I think that is the challenge we are facing. So not necessarily this is polarization. I think it's a different kind of homework we have to do, where I talk for Europe. Yeah, we need to stay attractive in the next decade, in the next decades. That is what we need to have for our prosperity, and that attractiveness comes not by, let's say, limiting ourselves or what is called now reshoring or all these ideas and more protectionist stance. No, it's more going out and being attractive, but also create that win-win situation, so taking into account the other side of the table. And with that attractiveness, I think we also show that we can do better than authoritarian regimes.
Yeah. A couple of words just to follow up what has already been said. I think it's impossible to divide the world into camps entirely. Like we trade only with these countries, we don't buy anything from those countries. I think that this is what we need is to try to think in security terms. We do our homework. We ensure that we close the gaps of vulnerabilities, that we are resilient, and we can cooperate with others after doing this homework. We can trade with others, but there are also many other issues that we have to work together, like climate change. We cannot solve the climate change problem in a divided world to make sure that the part of the world lives in, green and not affected by climate change world, and the other part we don't care because we live in the same world. So I think that the most important thing is to do the homework and start to think about cooperation in security terms, and to ensure that we are divided in all aspects. Democracies versus autocracies, it's impossible on one hand. And another important aspect is, it's not a set picture. We are not sure what we'll be seeing in 10 or 15 years. Now we are seeing the reducing number of democracies. We have been seeing this for many years, but it's not irreversible. Maybe there will be changes in some countries. So what, then we accept them? That's going to be very difficult. So security thinking, doing homework, and then trade and cooperation with others.
Okay, it's just time for one last question from me. If I could ask you to put on a scale, if we look at economic coercion and the way your countries, the West, whatever we want to call it, the West and East, and the developed world is dealing with it, compared with pre-Lithuania, pre-2020, what happened to Lithuania, where would you say, if we were on a scale of 0 to 10, starting at 0, how far have we gone and how far have we got to go? Anybody want to offer a minister? Not Lithuania, which is a 10, but the EU as a whole.
No, look, first of all, I think that there has been a change, and I think that I'm able to say that Lithuania was a part of that change. We were that canary in the mine, to get the message through that these things are really happening the way that they're happening, and what needs to be done in order for them to happen differently, at least, or for us to be better prepared. So I think that there is an added motivation to this. But honestly, I'm going back a little bit with few words just on the previous question. When we're talking about polarization, all of the colleagues here on the panel are answering about China. That's the first thing that jumps into your mind. But when it comes to polarization with Russia, it's already out there. I mean, Russia is we're not talking about the same rules that apply to Europe and Russia, that we would like to next year we'll be trading, maybe we'll build another pipeline or something like that. Basically, there is a divide already. And it's not just authoritarian and democratic. It's more aggressive to us and us defending. And, Iran has taken a stance. North Korea has taken a stance. And many here are hoping that China still is able to make a right decision and choose the right side of history. There is less of optimism here. In this country, probably in this part of the world, in Central and Eastern Europe, when it comes to which path do authoritarian countries normally would take, is there a historic predisposition for them to shift sides? But we have to really be clear and open about this. That we are already in a polarization. It's not global in the sense that it's not 50-50. It's part, but part has chosen the side which we're not in.
Thank you. very briefly, anyone else want to give me a number?
Just all I would say is, we've had past examples of Japan, Korea, Australia, and others being coerced. I think at some point we decided that we'd seen this movie too long and that it had to stop. And I think that you'll see more of that. And we're still building the response, but I do think there's a realization that, as the foreign minister mentioned, this will happen again. And I think we have to continually evolve and prepare.
Okay. Could you?
Just quickly, well, first, to the minister's point, yes, Russia's case may be a bit different. We intend to take strong measures against Russia for these aggressions. So yes, it's a polarization. It's a little bit different. I agree. And on this economic security, economic coercion issue, the most important thing, I believe, is as OECD agreed last week again, such attempts to coerce other countries will fail. We will make sure that such attempts of economic coercion will fail. That's why we've been discussing this like today, and we will try to continue to have international collaboration among the like-minded countries in the coming weeks, months, and years. Thank you.
Michael.
Yeah, I think now with our anti-coercion instrument we have developed, on the football pitch now, the ones who want to play rugby, they see, okay, they risk a kickback. So they should stop this. And I think this deterrence and this anti-coercion instrument is a real step forward. Of course, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating, but with that, we have established on that scale, I think we have reached 7.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would be more critical. I would say 5, and I'm looking. I'm a professor, okay. So I'm probably more
the PhD
strict
thesis to come.
thinking about the PhD thesis. So for me, it's a glass half full. For instance, anti-coercion instrument. It's a strong deterrent, but it's better working, not being used. Because if we're gonna go into wide discussions and it's not gonna be used into the full extension, and there are risks, then it would be a big damage for this instrument and in general for the EU policies. So we are working towards that, but is it irreversible? I don't see this yet. And in particular, because of what I was mentioning before, the societies. And is society willing to be on board in providing the solutions to this huge problem? And therefore, I think that communication is key, and we have to reach the societies. Otherwise, we will be facing lots of elections all over, and our efforts would be nullified, and we will start from the beginning.
Okay, thank you very much. We've just slightly run over time. So I've kept you from your lunch, but we would like to thank the panel very much for their participation, and thank you in the audience for your questions. I think you'll come back up. Yeah, thanks.
So with many thanks to moderator, for all panelists for sure for this enlightening discussion and a really good start of the event. As an organizer, I have to recall some organizational details as well as organic human nature of us all by pointing out 2 actually things. Firstly, you cannot run on empty, usually people say. And secondly, a hungry man usually is an angry man. So having this in mind, I would like to inform you that now it's time for lunch, which is waiting for you in the adjoining room. And one more very important thing is I would like to remind you that strictly at 1 p.m. we will be waiting for all of you back here in this room. We'll have to resume our discussions, and second high-level panel gonna take place here. So bon appetit and thanks a lot.